The Glass Sea by Cinder Gallagher. The harbour of Ellesmere glittered like crystals under the pale silver moonlight. Dozens of ships bobbed quietly at anchor, their hulls swaying like dark shadows against the lapping tide. Beyond the harbour, the glass sea stretched into eternity, its surface rippling with faintly luminous veins of light, currents of magic that the daring called lifelines and the wise called death traps. A girl crouched on the edge of the docks, her dark cloak blending seamlessly with the night. Her fingers danced deftly over the straps of a weather-worn satchel, ensuring its precious cargo was secure. Not that she had much to carry, just a few stolen trinkets and a brass sphere no larger than a walnut, humming faintly with an inner glow. "Are you insane?" A hushed voice hissed from behind her. Quinn turned her head, her sharp features barely visible beneath her hood. "If you're going to ask questions you already know the answer to, maybe stay in the shadows and let me do my work." Kasim's lanky figure emerged reluctantly from the gloom. He had a long scar that ran from his cheekbone to the corner of his mouth, giving him the perpetually pained expression of someone who'd once smiled too wide. "It's not work, it's suicide. That's the third ship tonight. You're pushing your luck." She flashed him a grin, her teeth glinting like tiny daggers in the moonlight. "Luck's just another word for preparation, Kaz, and I've been preparing for this my whole life." Before he could argue further, Quinn turned her attention back to the ship she'd been studying. The Nightbreaker was sleek and sharp, a predator among the lumbering merchant vessels. Its hull shimmered faintly, coated in some alchemical substance that repelled both barnacles and spells. This wasn't some common trade barge, it was a hunter. And the crew aboard it weren't mere sailors, they were reapers, scouring the glass sea for treasures no one else dared touch. It was the kind of ship that promised death. It was the kind of ship that promised wealth. It was the kind of ship Quinn needed. "Stay here," she whispered to Kasim. His eyes widened. "No, it's non-negotiable," she hissed. "No, Quinn." Kasim, her tone dropped, her words cutting through the night like a blade. "If you follow me and get us both caught, I will personally sell you to the salt mines." She didn't wait for his response. Quinn darted across the dock, her boots silent against the damp planks. She moved like a shadow, swift and unseen, until she reached the ship's mooring lines. Climbing was second nature. Quinn's fingers found purchase where none seemed to exist, hauling her body upward with the ease of someone who had spent more nights on rooftops than in beds. Within moments she was over the ship's railing and crouched low, her eyes scanning for signs of movement. The deck was deserted. A single lantern swayed near the mainmast, its light casting flickering shadows across the polished wood. Quinn's pulse quickened. She crept toward the hatch leading below decks, her hand brushing the hilt of the dagger strapped to her thigh. Inside, the air was cooler, tinged with the scent of salt and old leather. The corridor stretched into the dark, lit only by the faint glow of runes etched into the walls. The magic was subtle, a kind of warding that would alert the crew to intruders. But Quinn wasn't an amateur. She withdrew a small vial of powder from her satchel and sprinkled it over the runes. The glow faded. "Simple tricks for simple men," she muttered under her breath. She made her way deeper into the ship, her ears straining for the slightest sound. According to her source, a drunken sailor with more ale than sense, the Nightbreaker had recently recovered something extraordinary from the glass sea. Something valuable enough to make even the king's bounty look like pocket change. Quinn didn't care what it was. She only cared that it would be enough to buy her freedom. The sound of voices froze her in place. She pressed herself against the wall, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. "Reckless to stay in port this long," one voice growled. It was deep and gravelly, the kind of voice that belonged to a man who could crush skulls with his bare hands. "We leave at dawn," another voice replied. This one softer, colder. A woman's voice. "The captain wants to ensure the cargo is secure. You know what will happen if the orb falls into the wrong hands." Quinn leaned closer, her curiosity piqued. The man grunted. "If it's so dangerous, why not dump it back into the sea where it belongs?" The woman laughed, a sound like shards of ice clinking together. "Because the sea has enough power of its own. This is different. If we can control it, it will make us unstoppable." The voices faded, as the pair moved down the corridor. Quinn exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing the brass sphere in her satchel. She didn't know what the Nightbreaker had found, but she had no intention of letting them keep it. She continued toward the cargo hold, her steps light and deliberate. The door at the end of the corridor loomed like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. It was locked, of course, but locks were as much an obstacle to her as water was to a fish. Within seconds, the mechanism clicked, and the door swung open. The room beyond was cavernous, its walls lined with crates and barrels. But Quinn's attention was drawn to the pedestal at the center, where a glass orb the size of her head rested. It pulsed with an eerie greenish light, casting shadows that seemed to twist and writhe of their own accord. Quinn approached cautiously, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But she'd never been good at listening to reason. She reached out, her fingers brushing the orb's surface. It was warm, almost alive, and as her hand closed around it, she felt a surge of energy shoot through her. The room tilted, the air growing heavy with the scent of ozone. Quinn staggered, her vision blurring as whispers filled her mind. They spoke of power, of destruction, of a destiny she could neither escape nor understand. Quinn. She turned to see Kasim standing in the doorway, his face pale as a corpse. He hurried to stand beside her. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. "You need to put that down," he said, his voice trembling. Quinn frowned. "Why?" Behind Kasim, the shadows twisted unnaturally, coiling like serpents. Kasim's face was frozen in terror, his lips forming words he couldn't seem to speak. Quinn tightened her grip on the orb, her pulse racing. "I told you to stay back," she said, her voice low. Kasim's gaze flicked to her hand. "Quinn, you don't understand. That thing, it's alive. I can hear it. Alive." The word sent a shiver down her spine, but she refused to show it. The orb pulsed again, the energy coursing through her veins like fire and ice. She felt strong, sharper than she'd ever been, as though the whispers weren't just calling to her, but awakening something that had always been there. "I'll decide what I understand," she said, stepping closer to the pedestal. "No, you won't," came a new voice, colder than death itself. Quinn spun just in time to see the woman from earlier step into the room. Her presence drained the air of warmth. Her eyes glinted. The man with the gravelly voice loomed behind her, his massive frame blocking the corridor. "I knew a rat would scurry aboard," the woman said, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "But I didn't think it would be brave or foolish enough to touch the relic." Quinn forced herself to hold her ground, even as the orb throbbed in her hand. What's a relic like this doing on a death trap like the Nightbreaker? Shouldn't it be locked away in some royal vault? The woman tilted her head, amused. "Ah, a thief who thinks she knows history. How quaint." "She's more than a thief," Kasim blurted. "She's—" "Quiet," Quinn snapped, silencing him with a glare. Her fingers tightened around the orb. She could feel its whispers now, clearer than before. They spoke of escape, of vengeance, of power that no one, not even the ice-eyed woman, could take from her. "You're in over your head," the woman said, taking a step forward. "The relic isn't a trinket for gutter snipes to play with. It belongs to the sea, and it will destroy you if you don't hand it over." "I've survived worse," Quinn said, though her voice wavered. The woman's smile widened. "Not this time." The man stepped forward, unsheathing a blade that glowed faintly with runes. "Hand it over, girl, or I'll carve it out of your corpse." The orb's whispers grew louder, almost frantic. Quinn felt her heart slam against her ribs as the shadows writhed closer, feeding off the tension. Something deep inside her screamed for her to act. Before the man could move another step, the orb flared. A burst of green light exploded from its surface, throwing Quinn backward. She hit the wall hard, the air knocked from her lungs. When she opened her eyes, the world was chaos. The shadows had come alive. Tendrils of darkness lashed out, tearing through crates and barrels. The man bellowed as one wrapped around his arm, dragging him to his knees. The woman shouted an incantation, her hands glowing with frost, but the shadows swarmed her, snuffing out her magic. Quinn struggled to her feet, clutching the orb to her chest. Its warmth burned hotter now, almost unbearable, but it kept the shadows at bay. She glanced at Kasim, who was cowering near the door, his eyes wide with fear. "We need to go," she said, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Kasim shook his head. "Quinn, look at you, that thing." "Not now." She grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the corridor. The ship groaned beneath them as if the shadows were tearing it apart from the inside. They stumbled up the stairs and onto the deck, where the night was eerily still. The shadows hadn't followed them, but the orb's heat was growing unbearable. Quinn felt like it was branding itself into her skin. "Quinn, drop it!" Kasim shouted. She whirled on him. "No, you don't understand. This is the only way out, the only way up." "Up to what?" His voice cracked. "You think power like that doesn't come with a price?" Before she could answer, the shadows burst through the hatch, writhing like a living storm. They swept across the deck, devouring the light of the lanterns and leaving only cold, suffocating darkness in their wake. The whispers surged in Quinn's mind, louder and clearer than ever. They weren't words, not exactly. They were promises. Of power, of freedom, of something vast and unknowable that could tear the world open like the hull of the Nightbreaker. The shadows closed in, and Quinn instinctively raised the orb. Its light blazed, searing through the darkness. The tendrils recoiled, writhing like wounded animals, but they didn't retreat entirely. They hovered at the edges of the deck, waiting, watching. "Quinn, for God's sake, drop it!" Kasim yelled, his voice ragged. She turned to him, her hands trembling as the heat of the orb burned through her gloves. "I can't. If I drop it, we're dead. Do you see what this thing is doing? It's the only reason we're still breathing." "Yeah, but for how long?" Kasim pointed at her. "Look at yourself." Quinn glanced down and staggered back. The veins in her hands glowed faintly, the same sickly green as the orb's light. The whispers in her mind weren't just louder, they were starting to drown out her own thoughts. She felt untethered, like her body was no longer entirely hers. "I can control it," she said, though the words felt hollow even as they left her mouth. "No one can control that," Kasim snapped. "That's the whole point. That's why they tried to lock it away." A low, guttural laugh echoed from the shadows, cutting through their argument like a blade. Quinn turned to see the ice-eyed woman staggering onto the deck, her pale skin streaked with blood and soot. The shadows parted for her as if she were their master, or perhaps their servant. "You can't control it," the woman said, her voice rasping but still laced with icy certainty. "But it can control you. That's what it does. It whispers, it tempts, and then it devours. You're just another vessel, girl." Quinn's jaw clenched. "Then why were you keeping it? What were you planning to do with it?" The woman's laugh was brittle. "Not everything needs to be understood. Some things just need to be contained. But now you've broken the seal. You've already let it in." Quinn's grip on the orb faltered. The whispers hissed and howled, pushing against her will, demanding she hold tighter. She could feel the shadows reaching for her again, eager to consume everything the light didn't touch. "Give it to me," the woman said, stepping closer. Her eyes gleamed with something darker than malice, desperation. "I can still fix this. You're too weak to fight it, but I'm not." Kasim moved between them, his hands outstretched. "Stay back," the woman sneered. "You think you're saving her? Fool. You're just prolonging the inevitable." Quinn's head throbbed, her thoughts unraveling into fragments. She could feel the orb's power burning through her, seeping into her mind, her heart, her soul. It would consume her if she let it. But if she gave it up, what then? Would the shadows leave them be or devour them anyway? Would they claim Kasim? The deck beneath them groaned, splitting down the center. The ship was breaking apart, its magic-warded hull no match for the chaos unleashed by the shadows. Quinn made a choice. "No one's getting it," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Before anyone could stop her, she turned and ran for the ship's railing. The orb pulsed violently, as if sensing her intent. The shadows roared, surging after her, but she was faster. She reached the edge of the deck and hurled herself overboard. If she could save Kasim, it would be worth it. The icy waters of the glass sea swallowed her whole. The world went silent. The first thing Quinn noticed was the light. It surrounded her, soft and pale, illuminating the depths of the glass sea like moonlight on a cloudless night. She should have been sinking, drowning, but instead, she floated, weightless and calm. The orb hovered in front of her, still pulsing with its eerie glow. But now, beneath the waves, the whispers weren't harsh or frantic. They were gentle, almost melodic, weaving a story she couldn't quite understand. Quinn reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing the orb's surface. Images exploded in her mind, memories that weren't hers. She saw a vast city beneath the sea, its towers carved from crystal and coral, shimmering with an inner light. She saw people who moved like shadows, their forms shifting and translucent, as if they were more magic than flesh. And she saw the orb, cradled in the hands of a queen whose face was hidden by a veil of sea foam. The whispers coalesced into a single thought, clear and undeniable: this is not your power to wield. Return it to the sea. The orb descended and the light faded. The icy cold rushed back in. When Quinn surfaced, gasping for air, the Nightbreaker was gone. Only a few jagged pieces of wreckage bobbed in the water, the shadows that had consumed the ship nowhere to be seen. Quinn! She turned to see Kasim clinging to a piece of driftwood, his face pale but alive. Relief flooded her chest, and she paddled toward him. What happened? He stammered. Quinn didn't answer. She didn't know how to explain the weight in her chest. I don't know, she said finally. Kasim's eyes narrowed. What about the relic? Quinn glanced at her hands, now empty. The orb was gone, but its presence lingered like a shadow in her mind. It's safe, she said, though she didn't know if that was true. Kasim didn't press her. He just sighed and looked toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn was breaking. We're alive, he said softly. For now, Quinn thought. The glass sea never gave anything freely, and it never let go of what it claimed.